When I lost my job, my father didn't comfort me. He sneered. His lips curled as he called me useless, like the word had been waiting on his tongue for years. He said he'd always known I would fail, that I was never cut out for the real world. I sat there in silence, letting him believe his story. He thought he'd finally put me in my place, that this was the moment I would disappear quietly while he handed everything to my brother. What he never knew was that months earlier, I had sold a patent under my maiden name. $99 million sealed in a trust, untouchable by him or anyone else. So, when he pushed me aside to upgrade, I agreed. I smiled. I walked away. Because deep down I knew there would come a day when the truth surfaced, and when it did, his smirk would vanish in an instant. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The kind that begins without warning and ends with your world turned upside down. My manager had called me into his office, his expression already telling me what his words soon confirmed: downsizing, realignment. Your position is no longer sustainable. I had been with the company for nearly a decade, leading projects that generated millions, patents under my belt, teams who respected me. None of it mattered. By 3:20 that afternoon, I was unemployed. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. I rehearsed in my head what I might say to my father. Maybe he'd at least pretend to care. But when I walked through the front door, his reaction was immediate. "There she is," Dad said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. 9 years in, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. I told you this would happen. You were never cut out for real responsibility. Across the dining table, my brother Mark smirked into his glass. He didn't have to say anything. Dad always did his dirty work for him. I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me, the same weight I'd carried since childhood. Every accomplishment I'd ever achieved had been minimized. Just luck. Temporary. Don't get too proud. I sat quietly as the meal unfolded. Dad spoke louder than usual, making sure my aunts, uncles, and cousins heard him. "Some people," he said, lifting his fork as if delivering wisdom, "just aren't built to handle pressure. They're better suited for smaller roles, things that don't require real backbone." Laughter bubbled up around the table. Mark basked in it. I kept my expression steady. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but beneath the table, I tilted my phone just enough to glance at the banking app. The number glowed back at me, unwavering. 99, 248, 563. Proof that I wasn't powerless. Proof that his words no longer defined me. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and raised my eyes to meet his. He thought he'd broken me, that this dinner was his victory lap. What he didn't realize was that every insult, every smirk, every dismissive laugh was only sharpening my resolve. That night, as the dishes were cleared and the conversations faded, I made a decision. I wouldn't defend myself. I wouldn't argue or plead for his approval. I would let him believe his version of the story for now, because when the truth came out, it wouldn't just correct him, it would crush him. The days that followed were heavy, not because I doubted myself, but because of how familiar the pattern felt. My father had always treated me this way, every success of mine, minimized, every stumble, magnified. When I won a science competition at 16, he shrugged and said, "Anyone can memorize facts, Anna. That doesn't make you brilliant." When I graduated at the top of my class, he muttered, "Grades don't mean anything in the real world." Mark, on the other hand, could do no wrong. If he closed a small business deal, Dad paraded it at family gatherings like it was a Nobel Prize. If he made a mistake, Dad excused it as part of learning. I wasn't jealous of Mark, at least not anymore. I was tired of being the daughter who could cure cancer and still be told I hadn't done enough. One evening, Dad gathered family and a few close business partners at the house. He poured drinks and raised his glass. "Mark," he declared proudly, "is the future of this family. He's strong, decisive, the kind of man who can lead." Then his eyes slid to me, sharp as knives. "And Anna? Well, she'll figure out where she fits. Maybe a smaller role, something less demanding." The room erupted in polite laughter. Mark smirked at me again, as if he had been handed a crown. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea what's coming." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For years, I had tried to prove myself to him, to earn even the smallest sliver of his respect. But lying there in the dark, I realized something important. I didn't need it anymore. Respect built on humiliation was no respect at all. I remembered the patent, the long nights in the lab, the endless sketches, the failed prototypes, the breakthrough that finally clicked. I remembered Walter, my mentor, telling me, "This invention could change your life, Anna. Don't you dare let anyone take it from you." And now, I hadn't. The patent had sold. The money was real. $99 million sat quietly in a trust under my name, and Dad had no clue. At dinner, when Dad made his little speeches, he believed he was shaping my future, pushing me down into some corner where I would stay small. What he didn't realize was that I was already planning my exit. Not a retreat, but a quiet, devastating strike. Let him boast. Let him humiliate me. Let him believe the narrative he loved so much. Because the higher he lifted Mark onto that pedestal, the harder they would both fall when the truth surfaced. It didn't take long for Dad to make his move. Within weeks of me losing my job, he was already shifting pieces around as if my absence in the professional world had created a vacancy he'd been waiting to fill. One morning, he called me into his study. The heavy oak desk between us felt like a barrier more than furniture. Papers were stacked neatly in front of him, and Mark sat in the corner, feigning casual indifference but radiating smugness. Dad folded his hands. "Anna," he said, his voice rehearsed, "I think it's time we clarify your role in the family business. You've had some setbacks. It's nothing personal. But this company requires stability, leadership, and Mark," he glanced proudly at my brother, "is ready to step up. I'm transferring a majority of decision-making power to him." I nodded slowly, though my chest tightened. "And what about me? You'll still be part of the family, of course," he said, as if that were compensation. "We've arranged a small settlement, a stipend to help you get back on your feet, maybe start something of your own. But from now on, the business is in stronger hands." Stronger hands? The phrase echoed like a slap. Mark leaned forward, unable to resist twisting the knife. "Don't take it personally, Anna. Some people just aren't built for this kind of responsibility." I wanted to laugh loud, bitter, unrestrained. Instead, I stayed calm. "So, all those years I worked alongside you both, those late nights, those contracts I negotiated, they mean nothing now?" Dad's expression hardened. "You should be grateful, Anna. Not everyone gets a chance to start over. I'm offering you freedom from the stress you clearly couldn't handle." Freedom. That was his word for erasure. The lawyer stepped forward then, sliding a set of documents across the desk. "A fair settlement," he called it. "No share of company assets. No dividends. Just enough money to keep me comfortable, but never enough to rival their power." I stared at the papers for a long moment. Then, without a word, I picked up the pen and signed. The lawyer's eyes flickered with surprise, maybe even relief. Dad exhaled, confident he had won. Mark smirked like the heir apparent he always imagined himself to be. What none of them noticed was the way my hand didn't tremble, the way my smile never cracked. I wasn't surrendering. I was simply allowing them to believe they'd cut me out, while I still held the one card they could never touch. Later that night, I remembered something my mother once told me before she passed. "Don't take the shovel away from someone digging their own grave. Just make sure you're not standing in the hole with them." As I folded the signed papers into my bag, I realized I had never taken her words so literally. Long before that meeting in my father's study, I had already built my lifeline. It began in a cramped lab space I rented on the outskirts of Raleigh. The walls smelled faintly of solder and machine oil, shelves sagging under boxes of spare parts and notebooks filled with equations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, every wire, every sketch, every sleepless night. I remember one evening in particular. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I hunched over my workbench, adjusting the final piece of a prototype no bigger than a paperback novel. My fingers were sore, my hair tied back messily, and graphite streaked my hands. When the last component clicked into place, I held my breath and flipped the switch. The device hummed to life. Not perfect, but functional. Entirely mine. That was when Walter walked in. He was 62, semi-retired. The kind of man who'd rather repair a broken toaster than buy a new one. He set down 2 cups of coffee, glanced at my face, and chuckled. "You look like you've been through a war," he said. "Feels like it," I admitted. "But it works. Walter, it actually works." He studied the device carefully, turning it in his hands with the reverence of someone handling treasure. "Anna," he said finally, "this isn't just an invention. This is freedom. Don't let anyone, especially your father, take this from you." I knew he was right. That's why, weeks earlier, I had already contacted Linda, a sharp-eyed patent attorney who didn't waste words. We met in her downtown office, papers spread across a sleek mahogany desk. "File it under your maiden name," she advised. "Use the lab address. No legal breadcrumb leads back to him." Every step was deliberate. Every signature, a layer of armor. Then came the phone call I'll never forget. Linda's voice was calm, but I could hear the smile behind it. "The patent's approved, Anna, and the sale finalized this morning. Medical tech firm out of Chicago. Total, $99 million. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the workbench, whispering the number like it might vanish if I said it too loud. $99 million. Already locked in a trust. Already safe. Walter clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You've just built yourself a lifeboat in a hurricane," he said. "Now don't tell a soul. Some storms are worth watching from the eye." I nodded, though part of me wanted to shout my triumph to the world. Instead, I tucked the papers into a fireproof folder, locked them in the bottom drawer of the cabinet, and dropped the key into my pocket. That night, as I drove home with the documents on the passenger seat, the streetlights flickered across them in golden stripes. I realized something profound. No matter what storm my father tried to create, I was no longer trapped in it. I was already standing on higher ground. The night of my father's grand dinner felt more like a coronation than a family gathering. The long dining table gleamed with polished silverware and crystal glasses, candles flickering against the tall windows. My father moved through the room like a king, shaking hands, pouring wine, ensuring every guest understood that this was his kingdom, and Mark was his heir. I slipped into a chair at the far end, quiet and unnoticed, which suited me fine. Dad clinked his glass, drawing attention to himself. "Tonight," he announced, voice booming with pride, "I want to celebrate a man who embodies strength, resilience, and vision. My son, Mark." Applause rippled through the room. Mark stood, grinning, pretending to be modest though the smugness in his eyes betrayed him. Dad continued, "Mark is the future of this family's business. He has what it takes to carry us forward." Then his gaze slid to me, sharp as broken glass. "And Anna?" he added, pausing for effect. "Well, she's finding her path. Some people just aren't built for the pressure of leadership. It's not a weakness. Really, it's just reality." Laughter scattered around the table, polite but stinging all the same. My aunt leaned toward me, whispering something meant to sound kind. "Don't worry, dear. You'll find your place. Maybe teaching, or something gentler." I forced a smile, though inside, every word landed like a pebble thrown against glass. Alone, they were nothing. Together, they could crack the surface, but what no one knew was that I had reinforced myself with steel long before this night. As the main course arrived, roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, wine poured generously, Dad launched into stories of Mark's achievements. Deals closed, meetings led, opportunities seized. Each tale grew taller, each applause louder. Mark soaked it in, basking in the role of chosen one. I excused myself quietly, slipping into the hallway. In my bag, neatly folded, were documents, bank statements, receipts, contracts, proof of what I had built, hidden in plain sight. I ran my fingers over the envelope, reassured by its weight. When I returned to the table, Dad raised his glass again. "To Mark," he declared, voice triumphant, "and to family, the strong ones who carry the rest." His eyes flicked toward me, daring me to protest. But I didn't. Instead, I raised my glass too. "To family," I echoed, my tone even, my smile calm. Because I had already decided, I would let them have this night, their little performance of superiority. I wouldn't argue, wouldn't defend myself. I would let the curtain fall exactly as they expected. And when the truth finally came to light, it wouldn't just dim their celebration, it would extinguish it. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Success had always made my father reckless, and with Mark riding high on his approval, recklessness turned into extravagance. New cars appeared in the driveway, each more expensive than the last, weekend trips to Aspen, designer suits, lavish dinners charged to accounts they assumed were theirs alone to burn through. But they'd forgotten one important detail. Many of those accounts still carried my name as guarantor. Silent, invisible, buried in paperwork but binding all the same. I first learned of it from Caroline, an old acquaintance who thrived on gossip. We ran into each other at the market, near the stacks of apples and oranges. "I saw your brother at the dealership last week," she said casually. "He mentioned using the family credit line. Surprised you're still letting them do that, after everything." I kept my face neutral. "Oh, I thought those were closed." She shrugged, unconcerned, and drifted toward the bakery. But I stood frozen for a beat, my heart steady, my mind calculating. If those accounts were still open, that meant every dollar they spent was technically tied to me, which also meant I had the power to end it. That night, I pulled the old files from a drawer, flipping through page after page until I found them. 3 active accounts, each with balances that made my stomach tighten not from fear, but from the sheer arrogance of their spending. Travel, jewelry, luxury resorts, it was all there, plain as day. The next morning, I called Scott, my financial advisor. His voice, calm as ever, steadied me. "You want to move on this?" he asked after I explained. "Yes," I said firmly. "Freeze the accounts. Call in the balances. Today." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "That'll hit hard, Anna. Your father won't take it lightly." "I don't want him to," I replied. By noon, I was in Scott's office downtown, the hum of the city just beyond the glass windows. He spread the documents across his desk, his pen poised. "Once you sign these, the banks will be obligated to act. No further charges, repayment due immediately." I signed without hesitation, my hands steady. Every stroke of the pen felt like shutting a door my father thought would stay open forever. That afternoon, as I walked back through the city streets, the air felt sharper, electric. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached the corner. His name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. A moment later, a text came through, the words jagged and furious. "What the hell did you just do?" I slipped the phone into my bag, a small smile tugging at my lips. He had felt the blow instantly. The accounts were frozen, the walls closing in. And this was only the beginning. My father summoned me to his office the following week. The tone of his voice on the phone was different, clipped, brittle, carrying the edge of a man who suddenly felt something slipping from his grasp. When I arrived, the room was already staged like a tribunal. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mark lounged beside him, trying to look confident, though the tension in his posture betrayed him. 2 of my father's oldest business partners occupied the other seats, their expressions unreadable but curious. "Anna," my father began, his voice heavy with restrained fury. "Care to explain why the credit lines are frozen? Why my son and I were humiliated at the bank like common beggars?" I slid into a chair across from them, folding my hands calmly. "The accounts are tied to my name. I have every right to protect myself." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "You're strangling us financially. Do you have any idea what damage you've done?" I met his glare without blinking. "More than you managed on your spending sprees? Don't insult my intelligence, Mark. I've seen the statements." For a moment, silence. My father leaned forward, his eyes burning into mine. "This is childish, petty. I gave you a way out, Anna. A settlement, freedom, and you repay me with sabotage?" The corners of my mouth curved into the faintest smile. "You call it sabotage. I call it accountability." His fist hit the table with a thud. The business partners exchanged glances, clearly enjoying the show more than they should have. My father took a deep breath, composing himself. "Enough games. Sign over what's left of your share in the company, and we'll forget this stunt. Otherwise," he let the word hang like a blade, "you'll regret it." I let the silence stretch, the weight of their arrogance filling the room. Then, slowly, I reached into my bag. My fingers brushed the thick envelope I had been carrying for weeks. I placed it on the table with quiet precision, not a slam but a deliberate weight. "What's that?" Mark scoffed. I tapped the envelope once. "Proof. The kind of proof that makes your little empire look like pocket change." My father's brow furrowed. He hesitated, then tore it open. His eyes scanned the notarized documents inside: dates, signatures, wire transfer records. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to something I had waited my entire life to see: fear. "It can't be," he whispered. "It is," I said evenly. "A patent. Mine. Developed before you ever tried to cut me out. Sold last year to a Chicago medical tech firm. Total: $99 million. Already secured in a trust." Mark's mouth dropped open. 99? That's impossible. "Check the signatures," I replied. "You'll notice my name is the only one on every page." One of the business partners leaned over, scanning the document, and let out a low whistle. The other raised his eyebrows, impressed. The air in the room shifted instantly. My father's smirk, the one he had worn for years, the one that mocked me every time I tried to prove myself, crumbled in an instant. His hands trembled slightly as he set the papers back down. "You," he began, but no words followed. I leaned forward just enough for my voice to cut through the silence. "You thought you could erase me, replace me, but the truth is, I was never dependent on you. Not your money, not your approval, not your company. While you were busy crowning Mark, I was already building something bigger than you could ever imagine." Mark's face flushed, torn between outrage and panic. My father sat frozen, his world unraveling in front of the very men whose respect he prized most. I rose slowly, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you," I said softly, "for the closure." Neither of them spoke as I walked out, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly untouchable. The day of the final court proceeding arrived crisp and bright, the kind of morning that feels like a clean page waiting to be written on. I dressed simply, no statement jewelry, no expensive fabrics. I wanted to look like exactly what my father believed I was: ordinary, diminished, unthreatening. Let him cling to that illusion for one last time. My lawyer, Helen, met me on the courthouse steps. She carried a slim folder, calm and professional, as always. "This won't take long," she said softly, almost reassuring. Inside, the courtroom was half empty. My father sat stiffly beside Mark, both of them avoiding my eyes. Their lawyer, a younger man with too much confidence, whispered into their ears as if the outcome were already sealed. When the judge began reading through the agreements, I nodded politely, signing where Helen indicated. I didn't contest a single clause. No revision requests, no disputes. To everyone watching, it looked like surrender. To me, it was closure. My father smirked, leaning back in his chair with that familiar air of triumph. I knew what he was thinking. She finally gave up. She finally proved me right. But as the final papers were filed and the gavel came down, something inside me felt lighter than it ever had. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about being free. Outside, sunlight spilled across the marble steps. Helen handed me the folder and squeezed my arm gently. "It's done," she said. "Every tie severed. You owe them nothing." I thanked her, then lingered on the staircase, letting the breeze wash over me. For a moment, I just breathed. For years, my father's voice had been the one echoing in my head, reminding me that I wasn't enough. And now, for the first time, it was quiet. My phone buzzed, a new notification from the bank. I opened it, and the number flashed across the screen. 99,000, Trust account transfer complete. I laughed under my breath, the sound soft but victorious. Perfect timing. That evening, I moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city. White walls, one couch, a small table, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. I wanted people to believe I was scraping by, that I had been left with nothing after walking away. Let them whisper. Let them underestimate me. It was safer that way. Dana called, as she often did, her voice bright with curiosity. So, it's official? You're free? Yes, I said, smiling as I looked out the window at the city lights. Completely free, she laughed. And sitting on more money than half this city combined. You're the only person I know who'd call that freedom. Because it is, I replied. It's freedom to choose, to live quietly if I want, to build something new on my own terms. I thought of my father then, of the way his face had drained of color when he realized the truth. The man who once called me useless now knew I had built something untouchable. That knowledge alone was worth more than any apology he could never bring himself to give. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the city buzzed beneath me. For once, I wasn't planning, defending, or proving. I was simply being. And as I watched the night unfold, I whispered to myself the truth I had earned. I am not useless. I never was, and I never will be again.